app in the world and has been downloaded over 7 million times across 150 countries. Along with the other co-founders of Hallo, Alessandro was recognized as a member of the Forbes 30 Under 30 class of 2021 for consumer technology. He lives in Chicago with his wife, Sam, and son, Giovanni. Please join me in giving a warm Crusader welcome to Alessandro DeSanto.
Thanks, Ed. I think I'm going to go. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I think the audio is working. You can hear me? Amazing. All right. Perfect. Well, it's so great to be back, sort of back in the Bishop McDevitt family to a new physical location from when I graduated. So it is really great to be here this morning. The title of the talk is The Greatest Commandment, 2023 edition. But before we jump in, I want a few thank yous. So thank you for everyone for having me here. Dr. Gardner, President Harper for hosting, for the religion department for inviting me, Mr. DeMarco, Father Weaver, and Mrs. Thomas. Really excited to be here. And yesterday I guest lectured at a few classes at Notre Dame, and that was 25 people. This is going to be a little different vibe, and hopefully I don't totally fail. That's the goal, avoid failure at all costs. Before we jump in, we'd love to start with prayer, if you will join me. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, thank you for being with us always. Help us quiet our minds and our hearts so we can hear your voice and follow your will. Extend your grace into the busyness of our lives so that we may learn to be still and notice your presence. We pray for the courage to come to you, to share our burdens, and to listen to your voice. Help me trust in you so that you can hallow my life. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so as far as I can tell, I'm here because I am not just a token, but a token young person who is alive in the faith and meant to be a living example of how that is possible. As we'll talk about, I don't love the framing of the situation, but I think hopefully we can accomplish some interesting things together. I will admit that we do have some similarities, I with you as students. I grew up in Harrisburg, as you heard. I graduated from McDevitt, and when I graduated, Drake was on the top of the charts, and he's still up there. So keep riding through the six, I guess. We do have some differences, though. By the way, you're allowed to laugh during this. So I try and use humor to engage. So please don't make me embarrassed about that. We do have some differences, though. I graduated from 2200 Market Street, where the building had significantly less appropriate temperature regulation. So be thankful for that, for sure. I'm a millennial. You are Gen Z. And you are state champions, whereas my senior year, we lost the state championship by 1 point in 20-degree weather, where I was shirtless for a couple hours, which was, not ideal. So congratulations on that. The theme of this is eventually going to be how and why to live out your faith and what that means. But before we jump into that, I do want to share a bit of my personal story so that you can get to know me a little bit better. And it's on that story that I'll lean a lot on some of the lessons and the things that might be relatable. So, as I mentioned, grew up here, went to Holy Name, born into a big Italian family, as you can tell from my name. My mom was born and raised there. Grew up, my mom, aunts, and uncles ran pizza shops. On my dad's side, ran a construction company, so grew up in a kind of small, medium business environment. Came to McDevitt, really just wanting to fit in like everybody else. I was pretty good academically, and so knew that was going to be an exciting path, and really tried hard. If you go to the 2011 yearbook in the library, you will find that I was voted most likely to succeed, which probably makes me, weird and something that you'll probably judge me for at some point here in the way I describe my life. But there were kind of lots of foundational experiences here. There are three, in reflecting on my time here, that I think are really appropriate for this topic of how to live out one's life in a way that's authentic and relates to the faith, but also that's actually like real and relatable. So 3 McDevitt experiences that really shaped me. One of loss, one of love, and one of a miracle, which was pretty interesting. A couple weeks into my freshman year, I lost my, at the time, best friend and family member, in whose early 30s, left behind 2 young children, one of whom is sitting here today, which I'm really excited about. That was really hard because I'd never experienced loss before, and in a world where I'd given up where faith was kind of the fundamental assumption of life, it was really hard to navigate why things like that happen. And you may or may not have experienced death in close proximity to yourself, but we all have challenges, right? And life, a life of faith, as we'll talk about, is not one of perfection. It's not one of unceasing joy, although it can be. We all have challenges, and I'm no exception to that. And so, despite the illustrious, in some ways, introduction, we all have wounds that we don't carry openly, and that shapes who we are. And I want you to know that I know that about you. I don't know what it is, but I know each of you carry struggles in your life. The second experience or type of experience is that of love. Or what I at the time would have called love. And so this was like first serious girlfriend. Looking back, maybe not like the healthiest form of love, and maybe something closer to strong infatuation, not love. But this intense experience of being really focused on someone other than myself, and really wanting them to like me and to spend all my time with them, and to be really engaged in that way, that was something I had not experienced before, and something as we'll think about what does that mean for us? How do we live that out? And what kind of relationship does God want with us, and how similar or different might it be to something like love? The third is what I'll call a minor miracle. So before your time, there was a priest in the area who was quite beloved, and although somewhat controversial, and he passed away. He was one of the pastors at one of the feeder schools, and so there was a memorial service at McDevitt in the gym, where an assembly used to require rolling out big plastic tarps to not damage the basketball court, so another easier part of life here at One Crusader Way. But we were having this memorial for this priest, and many people were very sad who knew him, and I was in junior year English class, I want to say, and it was Mrs. Ciosi, who I believe is no longer here, class, and we walked in. It was kind of strange. We're looking out at the football field at the old school, and there was like music playing in the classroom, which was unusual. And we went through class, nobody said anything, and then we went into. We're getting ready to go into the assembly for the memorial service, the mass, and like as the kids started up and leaving, the music stopped, and so I stopped and asked Mrs. Ciosi, and I said, Seriously, like, why did you like play music for class? That was pretty weird. She's like, you want to see something? She walked back to the back of the classroom, and she said, do you remember what was playing? And I said, it sounded like Oh Danny Boy, the classic Irish-American song. And she said, that's exactly right. And it was coming out of this thing. This is a gift Father Mahoney got me. His first name was Danny. And I was like, okay, I didn't want to be rude, sentimental, playing his kind of little music thing that had an on-off switch that he gave her was nice. I was like, well, why'd you turn it off then, or whatever? And she said, well, that's the crazy part. She turned it around, opened the battery container, and there were no batteries in it. She said it just starts playing when students walk in. And that was the first experience I ever had, and certainly the strongest I've had in my life, of a supernatural grace or direct experience with God. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can find God and how he will reveal himself to us. But those are the 3 kind of themes: loss, love, and miracles, God and present in our lives, that we'll return to as we think about how to live one's life authentically. So I graduated from McDevitt, went to Notre Dame. As you heard, I majored in finance and economics. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I studied a lot of different things. In college, you usually take 15 credits a semester. That's like 5 classes. That's a full load. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, so I took 21 credits each of the first 3 years to like try a bunch of different things, which led to a lot of extra stress in life, but allowed me to find business, finance as this thing I really liked, and I thought that's what I wanted to do. At this point, kind of coming out of high school, the experience of loss that I mentioned, I had become, bitter's not the right word, but I had, through experiencing loss in that way, had become, I found it hard to engage deeply in relationships, ended up relying on intellect as opposed to emotion to kind of find my way in the world, which led to a lot of issues, as we'll talk about. But finance was this place where you could just be really smart, go make a lot of money, and have life be easy because you had a lot of money. And so I went to New York. It was a big investment bank, working on Wall Street. And although I was still going to Mass on Sundays, faith was kind of in a box for me. I never questioned the intellectual truth of the faith. I always believed the faith was true. I took Thomas Aquinas as my confirmation saint, big fan of the Summa. Like if you read the Church Fathers, the intellectual, scholastic traditions of the faith, like I always believed that was not false. But I didn't allow that to permeate the day-to-day life because faith was for Sundays, and I was a Eucharistic minister and things like that. But other than that, I was doing my thing outside of class. So fast forward a few years, catching up on the weekends with friends from Notre Dame, my roommates, close friends, and we realized that there were kind of 2 sets of challenges that we were going through in one form or fashion. My version of the challenge was I was working literally 7 days a week, 90, 100-hour work weeks, just like super stressed. And my then best friend, now co-founder, Alex, had fallen away from his faith, raised Catholic, went to up through high school because his mom made him go to church, but once he kind of got away from that, was now living kind of urban, millennial, Gen Z lifestyle, was like, all right, I don't need this faith stuff. But he did get really into meditation. And he had been, raise your hand if you've heard, this, I'm going to get some audience engagement going. Okay, I heard there were donuts, and so I think we hit first couple minutes we had Sugar Rush, and now we're going to try and avoid the crash. So raise your hand if you've heard of apps like Headspace or Calm, 10% Happier, Insight Timer. Come on, let's get them high. All right, beautiful. So some people, they're breathing exercises, body scanning, things like that. So he'd gotten really into that, and he was meditating 10 day, every day, 10, 15 minutes for 4 years. And he's like, look, man, you're pretty stressed out. You should maybe try this meditation thing. You could use a breather. And so I was still working a ton, but I gave it a try. I used Headspace. And the way I describe that experience is that it was helpful in that from a physiological perspective, if you're really stressed, your blood pressure's through the roof. If you sit still and you breathe deeply for 5, 10, 15 minutes, your blood pressure will go down. That will be helpful. That is a physiological truth of the human body. But 2 things. One, there are some spiritual dangers of an inward-only approach, which there's going to be Q&A at the end of this, so if you want to ask me about that, I'm happy to talk about it. But more practically for me, as soon as I created 10 minutes a day of silence, these much deeper life questions, what I would call small V vocational questions, really popped up in that space. We're like, hey, have you ever stopped to think what are you doing with your life? Or not what you want to do, but what God might be calling you to? And that was a big, scary question that I didn't really know how to answer. And so I just stopped meditating and went back to working all the time, which is not the recommended approach. If you have big existential life questions, do not just sweep them under the rug and hope that they'll solve themselves. That's a recipe for decades of stress and self-destruction, so don't do that. But that's what I did for worse. Alex, on the other hand, actually, who had fallen away from his faith and recommended meditation to me, had fallen in love with this woman, Megan, who is now the mother of their 2 children. And she was a pretty committed Catholic woman. And so she was going through what's called pre-Cana prep. So when you get married in the church, you go through this marriage prep process called pre-Cana, Cana being the wedding of Cana. And you got to go to these classes, and you got to make sure you're right for each other and learn some things about marriage ahead of time so you don't implode it at the beginning. You'll get a better educational pre-Cana in theology class, presumably, but that's the Spark Notes. So he was going through this. He's like, well, I guess I might as well figure out if I actually believe in God or not. If I'm going to go through all these hoops to get married in this way, which is certainly a reasonable thought. He's like, but how do I do that? So he goes, this is pre-TikTok, so goes where every millennial man goes for questions, which is YouTube. And does God exist? Or how to prove God exists? As if he was, the first person that had these big questions. And he found some interesting things. So we'll do another hand raising if you've heard of Father Mike Schmitz, Bishop Barron, Dr. Scott Hahn, somebody like that. We got a lot of hands up, yeah. So based on the hands, I'm thinking maybe some of those people make appearances in religion class, which is great. So he would watch videos from them, and he'd be super jazzed again, and be like, all right, God, jazzed is the word he uses, which is why I use it there. He'd be like, all right, God is definitely real. I'm back on the train. Let's go. But then he would watch another video, and you can do the same hand raising. Would watch a video from somebody like a Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, New Atheism. Just the teachers. Good. All right. Let's avoid those people. So it was like New Atheism, like you don't need God, just be happy / avoid suffering, which is a reasonably incomplete philosophical system, but we do not have time to get into that today. So basically, he was confused. He'd listen to one, be excited, listen to the other, and be confused again, and be bouncing back and forth. And the interesting thing is he kept meditating through this using Headspace, and interestingly, in that silence, he started to have these kind of pulls emotionally or images of things related to faith, the Trinity, the cross. And this idea popped into his head and said, hey, growing up, I was always told you could talk to this guy, meaning God. And if you can have a personal relationship with him, he must be real. And if I can't, either he's not real, doesn't care about me, or hates me. None of which are great. But all right, might as well give it a shot. So he said, literally, all right, God, I'm going to try and talk to you every day for 2 years. This is your moment. If you want me to know you're there, call back. Which, it should be said, is strong elements of pride and hubris in its putting God to terms to reveal himself, which, Scripture cautions us against. But it was 2 years, not 2 weeks, so we'll give him some credit there. But he didn't know how to do that. He didn't know how to have those conversations. And so he calls a former rector of ours from Notre Dame, who's now the head of campus ministry, Father Pete, a really lively guy. He would host Tuesday and Thursday 10 p.m. basketball sessions for the guys in the dorm, which was pretty awesome. And he's got a sick corner fadeaway. He's like 6'6". So anyway, so he called up Father Pete and says, hey, Father Pete, does the church have any meditation stuff? Because I'm looking to see if God's real, but I like meditation. I'm trying to find some intersection there. Father Pete just laughed out loud on the phone and said, Alex, I don't know how many classes you slept through, but we've been doing this for 2,000 plus years. It's called prayer, meditative prayer, contemplative prayer. We have monks literally all day just doing this stuff. You should really know what that is. And just as an example, that could be a place where you could, if you wanted to, engage in laughter. So that's up to you, but just as an example. So he's like, great, where do I get started? And so he proposed to him, he's like, you got to check out meditative prayer. So in the Catechism, which is, again, in my paraphrased way, compendium of stuff Catholics believe, comprehensively believe. And part 4 is on the Christian life of prayer. And it describes 3 expressions of prayer. One is vocal prayer, one is meditative prayer, one is contemplative prayer. You may have covered this in one of your classes. So meditative prayer, distinguished from other types of prayer, engages thought, emotion, imagination, desire, kind of in reflection of the truth of the faith, and asks God basically what do you want from me? And so one of those techniques is called Lectio Divina, which is divine reading. So reflecting on Scripture, short excerpts, reading it slowly, just seeing what jumps out at you. It could be a word, an image, a desire, a memory, and you just hold that and you ask God, what are you revealing to me in this moment? And then you kind of sit in reflection, asking, God, what do you want me to take away from this? And she's like, all right, great. 4 steps to Lectio Divina, pulls his now wife's Bible off the shelf, opens it to a random page, picks a paragraph, and says, all right, let's see, God, here's your first at-bat. The excerpt that he happened to choose was the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, where Jesus gives us the Lord's Prayer. And the word that jumped out to him was hallow, from hallowed be thy name. And he's like, what does that word mean? To hallow something. What is to hallow? To hallow means to make holy. He's like, well, what's going on there? Is Jesus trying to make the Father's name holy? Is the Father trying to make Jesus holy? Is Jesus trying to make us holy? Or are we called to make God holy? And in this kind of deep contemplative experience, immediately feels the presence of God, feels that someone's there trying to love him, this overwhelming feeling of wanting to be loved, and importantly, a desire to figure out how to love back. And not really knowing how to do that, but kind of kicked him off that path. Knew in that moment God was real, and that was the rest. So fast forward to the next Sunday dinner, which, as the Italian, I would always host and cook and provide wine for. And he was like, hey man, so like, how did you learn how to pray? And I was like, well, proud graduate of Bishop McDevitt High School, learned a bunch of great things there. Also, Holy Name of Jesus, and they teach you these things. He's like, yeah, so when's the last time you learned a new way to pray? And I was like, I don't know. Mr. DeMarco made me learn the Pater Noster in Latin, so does that count, right? Which I could still do, Mr. DeMarco, so be proud. He's like, okay, well, have you ever heard of Lectio Divina? And I was like, no. He's like, well, how about the Examen? I was like, no. He's like, you ever heard of meditative prayer? I'm like, not really. And I may have been asleep in some of the classes, so that could be on me. But Catholic grade school, high school, college did not cross my path. He's like, you should really give it a try. And, he had recommended Headspace, exposed these massive existential fears in my life that I've just been sweeping under the rug. I'm like, I don't know if I want to take another one of your recommendations. And he said, no, this is Catholic, you'll like it, give it a shot. And so I tried it, and it immediately clicked for me as the tool that I was missing to answer those big, scary questions of, God, what do you want for my life? And, meanwhile, I'm still working 7 days a week, doing the high finance thing, flying all over the world, working on billion-dollar deals. And that started to really kind of unwind and rewind kind of life in a way that became a lot more clear and purposeful. So that first conversation with Alex was kind of February, March of 2018. By April, May, we're like, wouldn't it be awesome as we're learning all these types of prayer techniques we're like talking about on the weekends? Like, wouldn't it be awesome if instead of like Googling or memorizing 4 steps to Lectio Divina, 5 steps to the Examen, these glorious mysteries, these joyful mysteries of the Rosary, and then like closing eyes, opening eyes, reading, reflecting, you could be guided in an audio-guided way, in the same way that Calm, Headspace, all these secular meditation apps do, but for these different types of prayer, so that you could be exposed to these different things and not feel like you have to be an expert to go through all these kinds of things. And Alex and his friend Eric, who I later met, we actually went to Notre Dame together but didn't know each other, we're like, well, we're engineers. Like, Alex was a mechanical engineer, Eric was computer science. He's like, oh, we can figure out like some code for that, and it's basically a play pause button and like choose what you want to pray about. And we had some theology friends. We're like, oh, we can work on some scripts and make sure we avoid heresy, which is always a good thing to do. And, like just put together a simple, we wouldn't have used the word app, but like something that we could just like have these recordings on. And so we started doing that. Now keep in mind, I'm working until like 2 or 3 a.m. every night. So like I'm working on it from 3 to 4 or something every night or every once in a while. And, by the summer we had this like working play pause button. We were spending quite a bit of time like adding sessions and things. And, the more time we spent on it, our friends and family were like, what are you guys like doing over there? Can we try it? And so by that summer we had 100, 150 people using what is now an app, but at the time was just like a prayer resource. And it was really just built for us. The crazy thing was the stories we started to hear back from our friends and family who had started using this simple prayer resource. And the kind of peak crazy one was a female friend from Notre Dame. She's actually a friend of Eric's ex-girlfriend. There's like 5 or 6 like amazing Hallow stories that all start with, so Eric has this ex-girlfriend who introduced us to whatever. So his life lesson is don't have bad breakups, or like be able to call those people back. So that's one takeaway, if nothing else. And so she's like dating this guy for 3 years, trying to figure out if she should marry him after college. And she was like, I just really feel like I'm torn. I don't know what to do. I'm really trying to figure it out. Like, I heard you guys have this thing, this prayer thing. Like, I'm happy to give it a shot. I'll give you user feedback if you let me use it. I'm like, yeah, knock yourself out. 2 weeks later, 11, 12 days later, she called back and she said, guys, I cannot believe this, but I'm going to send you my prayer journals. I actually feel like I have finally been able to discern what God is calling me towards, and ends up breaking up with a boyfriend and committing to religious life as a sister of Christian Charity. So, nun. And so we're like, wow. Now, first of all, I don't know, but I presume the boyfriend is maybe not a Hallow user, but she is. And we clearly didn't do anything. It was God extending his love and grace to her, and it was her yes that accepted that grace, and the fruits were born totally between the two of them. But it kind of hit us on the head like a rock, saying, hey guys, like, instead of like thinking about how to discern, why don't you actually discern what you're being called towards, and maybe include this on that list? Again, you can ask follow-up stories on what that looked like, but the clear takeaway was that we were being called to try and help people have experiences like that. So I walked into my partner's office one day. Now, so to give you just a sense of things, I worked in like a 50-person investment company. We managed $3-4 billion between those 50 people. And of the 10 partners that I worked for, 5 of them owned their own planes. One of whom, who was a person I worked with directly, had in casual conversation mentioned, I could never really trust someone that's like religious, because religion is just a crutch for the weak. Great, okay, I'm gonna keep that to myself. So I had to go into his office and say, I gotta go do this thing. I'm gonna give away this, forfeit this salary, give up this trajectory, and like, okay, shocked. I assume you're going to a competitor, like going to try and like whatever, give you more money. Like, what are you doing? I was like, well, I think we're going to go try and help the world pray a little better. And so, at this point, they're just like, all right, you've lost your mind, good luck, whatever. And so that was pretty tough. It was like an entire change of identity, some interesting conversations with my parents, interesting conversations with my then girlfriend, now wife. And, we can talk about that experience, and we will here in a sec. But that was just over 4 years ago. By December of that same year, 2018, we launched what is now Hallow in the App Store. And since then, you heard all the crazy numbers. People use the app to pray 4 or 5 million times every week across the world in a couple different languages. We have 56 people working on it full time, and it's just been pretty wild. All credit to God. I think like if it was us, we would have messed it up a long time ago. But that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years. If we, at Q&A, face silence, I also do some venture capital investing as a consequence of my prior life, and so if you want to talk VC, I can also talk VC. But basically, I spend every day trying to go and help people, including, I'm glad to hear, Bishop McDevitt will be rolling out the app in the coming months, so we're very excited about that. We work with Catholic schools, grade schools, high schools, colleges, universities, and just a bunch of individual people to kind of help you develop a personal relationship with God. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So, taking a step back. That's my story. Doing pretty good on time. I say that because what I think is important when we ask this question of what does it mean to live out the faith publicly? And that comes up with like what are obstacles to that, which is kind of what I was asked to talk about. I want to start with like why should we even do that? Like what is the purpose of even trying to attempt that? And in a world that's pretty crazy and divisive and often hostile to religion and has a lot of peer pressure, particularly in high school, and a whole bunch of things going on, I think it's helpful to kind of take a step back and look at the situation from a totally different perspective. So I want to share one story to help us get into that frame of mind of looking at things differently. So one of the interesting experiences I had at Notre Dame was I was part of this business club, and we did an exchange program with Peking University in Beijing, China. And once a year, we would send some students there to do a week-long study and some case studies at their school, and then they would send some students over. So we have some mostly like sophomores and juniors from China. I've never been outside of China, and I've come to South Bend, Indiana, in basically the middle of winter. And we're like, okay, show them around, show them America, show them stuff. So we took bad planning. We took them ice skating. They had never seen that or experienced that, and within 5 seconds, one person falls, breaks their arm, and has to go to the hospital. So plan better is one of the life lessons there, but or at least think ahead, get elbow pads and helmets. Anyway, so we quickly exited the ice skating arena, and then we were touring around campus. We're showing the academic buildings, showing the main building, taking pictures at the football stadium, and then we get to the basilica. And without doing a side tangent on Catholicism in China, it's a very strained relationship, and there's an underground church that is in line with the Vatican, and then a state-sponsored version of Catholicism where they pick the bishops, and it's a tense relationship because communists are generally atheists. We can Q&A on that if you want to go deeper on that. The interesting thing was you walked in, and they're like, well, what's this? And everybody looks to me as the guy that Eucharistic ministers every once in a while. They're like, well, you explain Catholicism in 10 minutes while walking around this basilica. And I'm like, all right, so God, there's a God, and cross, Jesus, that's his son. We do bad things, so he came down and became human so that he could save us by dying and rising from the dead. Wow. Literally, this is the first time they're hearing the story of Jesus. And I'm like, there's no audience, so that they don't know if I'm going to do a good job or not, but I'm like, how do I do this? I'm like, okay, so super simple. God, that's God's son, dies, saves us. We're walking around who are all these other people? Well, he had some friends. They wrote stuff down. That's the book. We read from that so we can learn about him. That's kind of an important part. And who are these other people? These are saints. These are good people. If you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. And that's not good. And so you should be like saints, so we look at them so we can learn to live like them. And all right. So we go out. I'm like, any questions? I'm thinking we got through this alive. And they're like, yeah, what are these big wooden boxes? I'm like, what? And I point around, these are the confessionals. And I was like, oh, great question. So those bad things? Well, if you go in, the priest, he's like the now Jesus guy. He's in persona Christi, rather than use that in that language. He represents Jesus. He dedicates his life to that, doesn't get married. And if you go in and you're really sorry, he will absolve you. He'll wipe away that bad stuff so you can still go to heaven. And their mouths hit the floor. And the first question I'll never forget was, wow, how much does that cost? And that just hit me like a sack of bricks. If you just think about some of the things we have access to in life, the value of them objectively, it's easy to overlook, and it's easy to get used to things around you. And so, and then obviously I told them it's free, and they were like, this is the craziest place in the world. And that was something that has stuck with me ever since. So, reframing and not taking for granted the things we look at. So, what does it mean to live out the faith publicly, and why should we? Well, in some ways, I don't agree with the question or the framing of the sentence. We don't ask people to why don't you live out algebra better? Why don't you live out chemistry better? And thank God for that. But in a general way, although acquiring knowledge, learning things, does give us better lenses with which to explore the world, it does allow us to better understand the universe, which has only one source, and that is truth, and we can find God in everything. It doesn't really fundamentally change who we are. So to live something out that you learn, it's kind of a weird concept. And if we think about faith as religion class, we end up where I was, which is faith in one box among many box options. And that's really the opposite of what we're going through. It comes out, if we do that, it'll come out when we need it. It'll stay put when we don't. It'll get hidden when there's FOMO or peer pressure or a boss that hates religion. And that is where I went wrong. Because I allowed myself to put faith in one box among many as something you learn about or intellectually just believe in, it won't escape, and it won't make sense to, how do you live that out? It's I take it when I need it. It's a tool, not an identity. Raise your hand if you've heard the expression code switching. This should be like everybody, I presume. Okay. For those of you that are either asleep or have never heard of code switching, the idea is like you present a different version of yourself in the situation. So if you are of a certain ethnic heritage, you might present yourself in a certain way to your family, use different language than here at school. You might want to fit in. You could use literally different language. You could use different dialect, different tone. The idea is like kind of fitting in by presenting who you are differently. Now, having heard that, raise your hand if you can think of a time that you have ever code switched in your life. This is everybody. Go on. Beautiful. All right. That is the problem. We are fundamentally confused about what faith is. We don't have faith about God. We have faith in God. Catechism tells us that faith is not just one thing, it's multiple things. It is both a supernatural gift and grace given by God, but also a choice we make to extend faith back into God. It is inherently relational. It's not an abstract belief system. It is a relationship with a personal God that you cannot turn off. And he loves each and every one of us. You can't code switch faith. You either have faith in God or you don't. It either is who you are or it is not. In fact, we hear in 1 John chapter 4, God actually is love. So what is love? We're getting deep, getting real deep. All right, think about the people you loved. Family, romantically, otherwise. Think back on that experience I shared at McDevitt, first girlfriend. What are some of the emotions you felt? What are some of the things you went through? For me, it was, I already talked about, like, I want to be with this person all the time. When I'm not with them, I want to be texting them. I'm thinking about them. Anytime my parents say I can't go out, I'm upset. I'm angry. Looking back on those flickers of, intense infatuation, or you thinking about even maybe a healthier relationship with parents or siblings or nieces or nephews or grandparents or whoever, there's this desire of wanting to be with the people you love. There's a level of passion there that is different than enjoying a good movie or scrolling through TikTok. If you've ever gone down the rabbit hole of like Googling quotes about whatever, the deepest rabbit hole you can go down is like Googling what is love and like all the different quotes. It's wild. But there are two, there's different types. There's familial, there's friendly, there's romantic love. We're not going to go into the Greek here, thank God. But there's kind of two elements of love that I want to highlight. Aquinas, my confirmation saint and one of the great doctors of the church, put it very succinctly: to love is to will the good of the other as other. And kind of key element here is that it's other-focused. It's not self-focused, right? We go to the gym, maybe in part because we want to look good for other people, but because we get stronger. We eat so that we can be sustained. We love so that others can be sustained. So it's inherently other-focused is the first thing. The second thing is it requires something of us. And that's pretty unique if you think about, again, chemistry, algebra. You can learn it, you can use it when you need it, but it doesn't require anything of you. Unlike those things, love is actually often described as kind of changing who we are or requiring us to change if we're really going to actually love. One of the great Mother Teresa quotes is, "Love, to be real, must cost. It must hurt. It must empty us of self." You can think about the loss I experienced when my best friend passed away. To love someone is to expose yourself to being hurt. If you've ever been broken up with, you can relate to that. This is actually one of the topics where popular music does not get it totally wrong, right? You got, "What is love? Baby, don't hurt me," right? You look at those lyrics, which I did in preparation of this, that's a bizarre song. Right? Like, "What is love? Baby, don't hurt me." Like, where's the segue? It actually makes a lot of sense, right? Like, when you think about love, the first unavoidable thing is that you can be hurt. And so as we move forward, what is love? If love is what we're aiming for, it's other-focused, and it's going to require you to open up in a complete way so that you can be hurt. It both transforms us, as we talked about, and exposes us, is what we just said. In my case, it required me to quit my job, go in, give up money, prestige, identity. And experiencing it can open you up to some of the most intense forms of pain or discomfort you might have. But luckily, that's not the only thing. It's worth noting, like, does God actually love us? Why should we love him back? Without spending another hour on the problem of pain and suffering, although there are bad things that happen in the world, the thing we know for sure, as we hear in John chapter 3, is that for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. God became man and died for us, literally died for us, so that we could live. If that's not an expression of love, I don't know what is. So, okay, we figured out what love is. It's other-focused. It requires a complete opening up. We might get hurt, but God does love us, and he's made the first move, so to speak, and Jesus died for us. How ought we to love? Okay, so we know what it is. We know that God loves us in some way. How do we love him back? Like, what does that mean in our day-to-day life? Well, if you've ever been to a wedding or seen a movie with a wedding in it, you'll be familiar with 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak in human and angelic tongues, but do not have love, I am a resounding gong or a clashing cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and comprehend all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything I own, and if I hand my body over so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous, it is not pompous, it is not inflated, it is not rude, it does not seek its own interests, it is not quick-tempered, it does not brood over injury, it does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never fails. That's a lot. That's intense. But that's what it is. We hear further in John 15, as the Father loves me, so I also love you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I've told you this so that my joy may be in you, and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I love you. No one has greater love than this, to lay one's life down for one's friends. This is where we see the ultimate expression of love, and that is the cross, the greatest example of love the world has ever seen. That is the choice we have before us. We can either choose to love God, and that transforms the very being of who we are, requires us to open ourselves up to be hurt, although we know God will never hurt us in a way that he doesn't console us through. He will not provide us challenges that we can't get through with his grace. But it is a life of patience, it is a life of kindness. That is the fundamental decision. There isn't a halfway belief that you can turn on and off. It either is who you are or it is not. So you might be asking, so if this is all pretty touchy-feely stuff, sounds great, very inspirational, but then why do I have to memorize all these rules, and there's all this stuff I can't do, and I got to believe all this extra stuff? Great question. Good news. Have an answer. Think about football, because we're at McDevitt, and think about all the rules of football, right? You got to get real organized. There can only be so many people on the field. Certain people can do certain things. Other people can't do other things. Everybody gets ready, can't do anything. All right, go, boom, all this stuff happens. All right, stop, can't stop touching each other, right? And then let's do it again. You got 4 times, otherwise you got to give it away, you do all these things. That's a lot of restriction, right? That's a very restrictive, non-free view of the world. But it allows us to have the beauty of the game of football. Certain forms of truth, certain forms of beauty have a proper form, and only in saying no to other things can you say yes to specific things. And it's in the rules that the beauty is created. Not because the rules create the beauty, because the beauty has a certain form and it requires you to say no to other things. That's what the rules are about. The rules are so that you can love well. Chesterton has a similar analogy that probably is less powerful. I should have probably put it first before football. But G.K. Chesterton, great read, Orthodoxy. We might fancy some children playing on a flat, grassy top of some tall island in the sea. So as long as there's a wall around the cliff's edge, they could, so long as there was a wall around the cliff's edge, they could fling themselves into every frantic game and make all the place the noisiest of nurseries. But if the walls were knocked down, leaving the naked peril of the precipice, they did not fall over. But when their friends returned to them, they were all huddled in terror in the center of the island, and their song has ceased. If we don't have boundaries, we're scared of going over the edge, right? If we don't have the rules of what is or was not within the bounds of love, within the bounds of faith, there's confusion and ultimately there's fear. And so really the rules are about providing the framework to allow you to fully enter into love. Okay, we're getting close to Q&A time, so we're going to big summation statements. All right, what does this mean for you? Faith is not something you can code switch in and out of. It is an identity. It is a choice to either love or to not love. God does love us. We have a choice of whether or not we want to love him back. That means a total self-gift. It could open us up to pain. But what does that mean for you? How do you do that? Well, here I have no idea. I have literally no idea what that means for you. Everyone has a different path. St. Joseph was called to silent obedience and an early death. Thomas Aquinas was an influential papal advisor and renowned scholar during his own life. Mary was called to give birth in a small barn among animals and watch her only son be put to death by the people he dedicated his life to saving. Mother Teresa met with world leaders and inspired care for the poor. St. Maximilian Kolbe exchanged his life for strangers in Auschwitz, Germany during the Second World War. St. Patrick lived 106 years and converted an entire country. Your story is your story. I can't tell you what it is. The only person that can tell you what it is God. And the way that you try and figure out is to have a relationship with him. You got to talk to him. That's what I missed. That's what Alex missed. That's what we found. It's in the silence of our own hearts that we find God's will. And only in searching for that silence and creating the space and asking him can we actually discover what it means for you. If you look for him, I guarantee you will find him. You may not experience the same type of miracle that I did in Mrs. Ciosi's classroom with the music playing out of the music box without batteries, but he will be there. You can also look towards the saints. I alluded to that. These are people that are very human, that have walked the walk. One of the things you'll find some wild stories among the saints. Many of them, very few of them, have lived like perfectly saintly lives their whole time. They are remarkably relatable and had many of the same struggles you have, even though they lived before cell phones. Some of them. Many did not. I saw Blessed Carlo Acutis outside. There are saints living among us. But they will have something to say. They want to help, and you can look to them. I do have an exercise prepared in meditative prayer if we don't get questions, but I do want to leave some time for questions. I will close with the title of this talk, which is The Greatest Commandment 2023 edition. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. What that means for you is between you and God. Thank you. Questions? Yeah, please. We have microphones. I know this is going to be potentially an anxiety-driven experience, or anxiety-creating experience, but I would love to answer any questions you have. Please raise your hand and we will get you a microphone. I do have plans if this doesn't go according to plan.
I have a question back here.
Amazing. I also do dating advice, so from the back.
Hello.
Hello.
So my one question was going to be, earlier you said that meditation can be dangerous. I wanted you to clarify that.
Yeah.
I was-
So one of the interesting words things about the word meditation is that it means 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people. It's been really supercharged by like the world over the past 5 years to mean a lot of different things. One of the kind of biggest streams of meditation that is most popular today is mindfulness meditation. And you can find a million different definitions of mindful meditation, but they generally have two core tenets. One is being in the present moment, and the second is embracing an attitude of non-judgment. The first part is totally good and perfect in every circumstance. The present moment, there's some great works by saints on the miracle of the present moment. The present moment is the only time when we can exercise our will. It's the only time we can say yes to God. It's the only time we can say yes to love anyone. So being in the present moment, as opposed to being fascinated or overly concerned about the future or the past, is bad, right? We hear in the Our Father, give us this day our daily bread. Not give us today bread for the week, not give us bread for the year, just focus on today, focus on the given moment. So that's good and great, and we should absolutely do that. We should cultivate silence and presence. The challenging part can be the second half, whereas this attitude of non-judgment, where you just, as thoughts come up or anxieties come up, you like put them on a log and let them float away. There are ways of doing that are fine, but the challenge is if you only focus inwardly, you can be left kind of feeling stranded and alone, which actually can sometimes compound into more anxiety, not less. And so the analogy I use for this is imagine life as sailing from point A to point B. If you need two things. You need there not to be a hurricane, and you need some way of navigating to get to a specific point B so you avoid all the other places you don't want to go. The first part, being in the moment, calms the sea of the storm in our minds, right? It gets rid of the hurricane so you can actually navigate and you're not just being tossed and turned all over the place. That's good and great and necessary. Imagine yourself, though, on the open sea, no land in any direction, and the sun's right over your head, and you're like, well, where do I go? If you don't have a way to actually navigate to a specific place you're going, that can be pretty terrifying. So in Catholic meditation, what we do is we bring a true north of Christ as a way to navigating outside of ourselves to align our will to His. We believe that Christian freedom is the search of aligning our will to God's, not just a maximum set of different options. And so when I say it can be dangerous, I mean if it's oriented only on the clearing part and just don't judge anything and just be yourself. We are not individual creatures. We are contingent beings that rely on God for existence and must accept His will in our lives to be fully who we are. And so there's got to be some outward focus of searching towards virtue or understanding God's will in your life. That's what we mean by Catholic meditation. And I don't have the quotes up on this document, but the Catechism actually lays this out pretty beautifully. Let me see if I'll paraphrase. It says, Christians owe it to themselves to meditate regularly, lest they become one of the three types of soil in the parable of the sower. And so we should meditate. What that means is a specific vision, so that, as a refresher on the parable of the sower, you don't want to be the dry, crackled land that is not receptive to the truth. You don't want to be the area where the weeds come up and choke the seeds, right? We want to create fertile soil in our lives so as to be able to understand and accept God's will. So that's the spiel on meditation. Great question. Got one down here. Perfect. Amazing. If you want to stand up and yell, I can repeat it if you want. No, all right, we'll get you a microphone. All right. That's yelling too hard might damage the great flow game going on there upstairs, so maintain cool, calm, collected demeanor.
Did you know immediately this is what you wanted to do?
Did I know immediately what I wanted to do? Clearly not. So, no. So here's the thing. I thought I knew what I wanted to do, right? But the problem is when we try and figure that out just ourselves, we can be led astray or confused. Like, I really loved finance. I continue to love finance. Like I said, I'm a venture partner at a venture fund. I do investing still, but life is not about figuring out like what our passions are, which you sometimes hear a lot about. It's about finding what is God's will in your life. Not because you don't care about yourself, or because He doesn't care about you. You're not like rejecting self when you're accepting God's will. He loves you so much. Again, He gave His only Son to die for you. Right? He loves you a lot. He knows what's good for you. It's a yes of accepting yourself. It's a yes to what His will is for you, because that's the best version of yourself. So yeah, clearly not. I mean, I took classes in artificial intelligence, in law, in architectural physics, in medieval poetry. I thought I was going to go to law school. I thought I was going to go to grad school for literature. I thought I was going to do all these different things. So I mean, it is a big, scary search, right? Sometimes, like, people ask, like, was it stressful to go in your job and just quit one day? Right? No income, right? So there's that level of stuff, and like, girlfriend was like, what's going on here? Parents were like, what's going on here? We just paid a bunch of money for this education. Like, what are you doing? I describe that as simultaneously, and I think this is true of all discernment, simultaneously the most and least stressful decision of my life. Most stressful because I'd built up my entire identity, financial livelihood, social circle on this being a certain person and doing what I thought I wanted to do. So in that, it was a tough to think of a bigger left turn from that than going and starting a prayer app. So it was pretty stressful. On the other hand, when something is the result of authentic discernment, you know that it's what you're supposed to be doing. And so there's this kind of, we talk at Hallow sometimes like, all right, God, like, we think you want us to do this. If it's going to go great, all glory to you. Or it's not because of us. You're never going to hear me taking credit for it. But if it doesn't work out, it's also on you, and so I'm not going to worry about it. You're going to provide if you want to provide, not if you don't. And so like it's upside and downside is you, God, and there's a very freeing part of that embrace. So both stressful and not stressful in different ways.
I'm actually going to follow up with a question from that. You had said that you had put God in a box for quite a while. What were some of the things that you started doing, that you found yourself doing when you started taking Him out of the box and started Him being a part of your everyday life and not just on Sunday? How did that initially start to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So having a different relationship with silence is the first thing. So 1 Kings chapter 19, by the way, up until a couple years, I was never a person that was like quoting Bible verses. So like, don't think that that's who I always was. Elijah is being called up to the mountain with God. And he goes up there. He's like waiting for God. It's obviously paraphrased. He's waiting for God. And he's like, all right, big fire goes by. Runs out, must be God. Real powerful fire. Not God. Goes back in the mountain. Big hurricane comes by. Big tornado. Must be God. Runs outside. Not God. Big earthquake. Oh my gosh, must be God. Moving mountains. Runs out, not God. Whereas God comes in the small whispering wind, or the quiet silence. I think the first thing that I realized as soon as I started kind of trying to figure out, God, what is your will in your life, you realize how much noise there is in the world. And if you don't create, sometimes He speaks through the miracle in Mrs. Hiosi's room, but sometimes, and most of the time, it's in the stillness and the silence. And so I'm currently doing a program called Exodus 90, which some of you may have heard of. It's like a men's 90-day journey of like creating more silence in your life and taking cold showers and working out every day and doing crazy stuff. But the idea is, if you want to know God, you got to create room for Him. And so I think the first thing I realized was how much stuff was packed in, like, commuting, have a podcast, work, texting all the time, scrolling through news, scrolling through Facebook, although I know that now dates me. Having YouTube shorts up or Reels or TikTok, like you go home, you watch Netflix, you're playing video games, you're doing homework, like, where's the silence? And I think the first thing you start to realize, you got to create space for someone. Alex talks about a conversation he had with a priest who was like giving him marriage advice, and it was like also struggling with his prayer life. And the question he asked was like, all right, Alex, imagine you came home to your wife, and I know that you guys are not married, but imagine a world where you had someone you called a spouse, and you came home, and you're like, all right, honey, like, my day was like crazy, right? I had all these achievements, I had all these failures. Tomorrow, I'd really love it if you could help me with get this done better, and yeah, great, good night. Like, what's missing? Like, oh, how was your day, right? Like, let's hear about you. What are you going through? Like, it's not a one-sided relationship, and in order to have a two-sided relationship, you need to create space for that. That starts with silence and grows into other things. Once you start growing on that, you start seeing other people differently. You start to realize that everyone is fallen and broken in the same way that you are. You realize that people, like I said at the beginning, are carrying wounds that you can't see. Once you realize that you are broken and that you can't fix yourself, you realize everyone else is the exact same way, right? Love is patient, love is kind, it's not quick to anger. Just like get to know people better and listen well and love them for the will of themselves, right? What Aquinas says, to will the good of the other. Those are all the kind of the manifestations of once you start creating space and relationship, that is a fundamental change in who you are, not this code switching thing. Yep, got one down here. I was petrified of no hands, so I appreciate you for saving me. What do the kids say? Thanks, bruv. Is that a thing?
How did you get over like the fear of like leaving your job and everything behind, and then going to like into the app?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very, like I said, super stressful and at the end not stressful decision. But like, how do you? Like, I'm literally going to work every day for like whatever, 15 hours a day, 16 hours a day, and not sleeping, which is not a great place to like discern. So there was this, we'd been talking about these things, right, these friends and what to do. So on a Saturday in the late summer, early fall, one of the guys lived outside of Chicago, and he said, like, come over to my parents' house in the suburbs, we can have like a little like time together just to think about like who like actually wants to do this, like who's gonna make the jump and do this full time and build it if you want to, or not. And so I worked, it was crazy at work, so I worked till 5 a.m. Friday night. Got like 21 hours. Went home, slept for 1.5 hours, got an hour-long Uber to the suburbs, walked in, I was like totally destroyed. Like, obviously, I'm not in great shape. And we started the morning with 45 minutes of contemplative prayer, and which I had done 0 times in my entire life. In part, I only went because later that day Notre Dame was playing football, and I knew we were going to watch the game and they were going to have food. So I got to go for the prayer part. And in that moment, there was complete peace. And I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel exhausted. I didn't feel like the physical pains in my body. I knew that whatever this was, I needed more of it, and I wanted to help other people find it. And so that was kind of the very specific moment where I decided, like, it was a couple weeks before I walked in and said no to the job, but it was in that moment that I knew. Now, when you get into things like the discernment of spirits, there are moments of consolation, which that would be an example of like real tangible graces. There are also moments of desolation where you feel totally alone, and so it's not like that all the time. These are like peak moments that God gives to us in grace out of his infinite charity, and that doesn't happen all the time. The deeper you get in the spiritual life, the more desolation you tend to find. Mother Teresa went for years feeling totally alone and never hearing God's voice, and really struggled with that. And so, it's not like that all the time, but for me, that was really helpful in figuring that out. I mean, one of the things that we talk about a lot with high school students, particularly, and this might be oriented towards teachers, but also to your peers, like, the church has done a great job of leading with the truth of the faith for 2,000 years, a great scholastic tradition. It's sometimes not always helpful to hit people over the head with a rule book in terms of like evangelization. Now, you need the rule book, right? We agree with that. You must have discipline. If there are any Jocko Willink fans in the audience, like discipline equals freedom. But you got to meet people where they are, and oftentimes, particularly in this crazy world, like leading with the peace of the faith can be a really powerful thing. Like what Jesus says to us, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." So if you're tired or anxious or stressed or carrying a lot, come to him, and he might make it a little bit easier. Dope. Any other questions? Oh, got another one. As the microphone finds its way to the middle here, I have one special message for teachers. Okay, okay, never mind. All right, we'll do that in a second. Yep, we'll go through.
So I have a friend that's going through a pretty hard breakup right now.
Yep.
What actions can I take to help him out with that?
That's
And, getting better.
It's a great question. Do you just want to give me his name and class year, and then we can just make that. Hopefully not the guy next to you. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a life. Tough things happen in life, and that is inevitable. I have had them. Sometimes when you love somebody, and they go through hard things, sometimes they want to talk about it. I know in part this question is throwing someone else under the bus, but I will answer the question regardless. Sometimes they want to talk about it, sometimes they don't. Right? Sometimes when my wife is having a bad day, I will literally ask her, is this one of those moments where you want to vent, or you want me to help fix it? And if it's a venting session, and you try and fix it, that's going to make it worse. Not everything needs to be fixed in the moment. Sometimes you just have to go through grief and figure stuff out. Being with the person is the most important thing. So I'll be like, hey man, I know you're going through a tough time. Rather than sit at home tonight doing, you want to hang out? Let's just spend time together. You don't have to talk about it. You can ask, hey, if you want to talk about it, I'm here. So offering, but not forcing the conversation. I think presence and showing someone you care is the most important part. So hopefully that's somewhat marginally helpful.
Alessandro,
If you know any-
we are
so-
actually running out of time right now,
Perfect.
so I don't know if you just want to make a final statement, and then we're going to dismiss them.
Yeah, perfect. So one quick note to teachers. You have a special responsibility. As I was taught here at National Honor Society, the motto, noblesse oblige, nobility obligates, or if you're a Spider-Man fan, with great power comes great responsibility. One of the top 3 reasons in the sociological studies of why people leave the faith at a young age is because they perceive hypocrisy by the people that lead them. And if you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. And I have to do that just as well, but if you don't have that foundation, it's hard to have tough conversations of faith with people. All right, in closing, you will be in my prayers. What I hope you can take away from this is that this concept of faith is not like chemistry or algebra. It's not just something you learn about and memorize facts. It is a relationship you can either choose to accept or not accept. If you do accept, that is going to look a lot like love, and you can look to your other relationships to see what that looks like, but it means caring more about the other person than yourself. That's going to mean different things to you. I can't tell you what that means. The only place you can find that answer is in prayer. We'll have Hallow in a little bit here with the school to help you as one resource, but just create some silence in your life, ask God, and he will tell you. Cool. Have a great day. Happy Catholic Schools Week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. We're going to head back to homeroom. We are on schedule, so at this time, we are going to use all 3 exits. I'm going to ask the top section here to go out the door to your left, the top section here to go out to the door to your right, and the center section to use the back center doors. All right, this section, you guys can go out to your left as well. Section over here to your right. Thank you.